And we are live. Yogapreneurs, welcome back to the Weekly Roundup. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today, but being that it's January, a lot of studios are experiencing a positive, strong influx of new clients and people on their intro, etc. And we're kind of at that point where a lot of the conversation that's been coming up is around the intro, around retention, around follow-up, around customer service. That's what we're talking about today, because that's what we've been seeing coaching with you guys too. So stick all the way through to the end, because by the end of this, there's going to be some really practical things that you can take away and sort of like audit what you're doing and you know, maybe tweak some things, because now's the time to help those people find that habitual yoga practice for the rest of the year. Carol's going to kick us off. Let's do it. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah. So interestingly, I've traveled a little bit the last couple of months, and I've been new to three new studios, and I noticed I didn't get any follow-up from any of these studios, like not a welcome email. It was just like, here was your purchase, and that's it. And it seems, I think, obvious to a lot of the YC members, like you need to have that follow-up, right? And sort of get the person back into your studio and explain why they need to do that. So I was thinking, obviously, if you don't have that follow-up in place, it's time to do it. That's going to help people come back. But also, if you already have something in place, it could be a good time to like you said, audit what you have. Maybe you have a new, vision for 2023. You want to put some wording in place to explain that to your new students, or maybe you've had a rebrand. I mean, it's definitely something to look into and make sure you have something in place that's really powerful for your new students to want to come back.
Can you zoom us in, Carol? I mean, obviously you have the perspective of being like a teacher, manager, owner, builder, seller, coach now. But I felt, for my experience was like, once I was full-time coaching, going into a studio, I just was looking at everything differently. As an owner and teacher, you look at things differently too. But as a coach, there's like another layer that you add in. So in your opinion, with these newer places you visited and they're not being follow-up, like what's your gut reaction with like that first 24 hours finishing the class? What could the follow-up have been that would have like been impactful in a positive way for you, or been surprising?
Surprising. I think even just we hope you enjoyed your class would have been nice, but I think that it's like, I have no clue now what they're out of mind at this point, so you want to stay top of mind. I don't have any clue what their packages are. I don't know what other class offerings they have. I wasn't going to go look it up on my own. If they kept pounding me with more information about them, I would maybe even go look their Instagrams or, whatever it is. To have nothing, it just kind of is shocking at this point. But I don't know. I have to think about what would have been surprising to me, or what would have like made me excited. I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I lost my train of thought. You go.
The little delay on my side this morning. So what I was going to say is one of the things you just said actually is really interesting, because, and I'm sure that we'll get to this. Teresa had mentioned this before we started today about like the curse of knowledge, that we had that conversation sort of coming up in the group this week too. But take me more down the rabbit hole. Like, why would you not go look at their website and figure out all of their class types and packages and teachers and stuff like that? Like, you were not compelled to do that. You know what I'm saying? Which I think is absolutely the status quo. None of us are. But why not? Like, what is it? What's the missing element that prohibits that from happening?
Well, partly for me, I was just in that location for a day or two. Of course, if I was going to go back and visit again, I'm sure I'd start to look it up. But I don't know. It's the experience I had, like you said, looking from a lens of a coach now walking in. I also saw all these things that they could really do better. I walked into one studio and there was nobody at the front desk. I had no clue where to obviously I can figure it out. Like I put my shoes here, sort of following along, but I had to go find the teacher myself and introduce myself to them. So it was a little uncomfortable, right? And so I don't know if it had been more inviting, I think, or I don't know. I have to think about how. I mean, I don't know. I'm
Maybe
still
sounds like the whole experience was underwhelming, not even just the lack of follow-up, right? Yeah.
It's a weird mental gymnastics to go through about, like, I know what didn't happen, but then if we like try to figure out why, even as a coach, it's hard. I think you're hitting the nail on the head on a few things. It's just the articulation that's sometimes hard to pull out too. If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's like, even the fact that you were describing a situation where you had to go introduce yourself to the teacher, I would debate that most first visit students, even if they have practiced yoga before, will not do that. Like, and there's a real, like, sort of antisocial, social anxiety situation across a lot of people where that is uncharacteristic in all forms of their life. So why they would be expected to do that then? And the result is that's when you get the studio where someone like signs up on ClassPass, they arrive at the studio, and then they just go past the desk and go like figure it out for themselves and end up in the room. And unless your team is there to stop them and check them in properly and stuff, like, you have no reception of that person. And we've seen that. So yeah, it starts with on the ground. Here would be the more specific question then. Maybe you finish the class, it's a few hours later, the next day, you're saying like even the how is your class message would have been impactful. How would you receive that message? Like, how would that message best be received by you personally, right? Not even the industry. You personally, what would have been the best delivery method where you would have actually received that message, consumed the message, and considered the message?
I think actually what would have been cool was some sort of like video from the owner. Hey, I hope you had a great class at our studio. I'm lead teacher, whatever it is, like somebody that's sort of like the authority at the studio to like really bring me back. And just something warm and inviting to come back to. That would have been good.
And like email, text message, push notification in an app. How would you actually get it?
That's a good question, because everybody's different at this point. I think a lot of people just don't even open emails, at this point. Text, I feel like, is always in front of my face. So, but I don't know about a video through text. I'm not sure how that would have been received. I don't know if you can.
Some you can put links in, some you can't, but then you're hoping that the person clicks the link. Carol, I'm curious, were you taking these classes when you were out of town? Or so that could also be, if they're actually looking to see if you're out of town and they're not following up with out of town people, that's a different sales process if they don't really have anything to sell you. If someone's from out of town and they're doing a drop-in, and we follow up with them to sell for my studio or virtual stuff, but it's not top priority.
But I guess the question, Jennifer, is top priority aside, like, should we still follow up with them? I feel like yes. I mean,
it's super easy to put a setting in that you don't have to do anything. You just let it run after your first visit. It's really not, it takes 10 minutes to set up. There's no excuse for not having some kind of a automated thing if it's not something personal.
Right. Like, maybe don't pick up the phone and phone those people versus a local, but like still send something. I love the idea of a video being there. There is a program, I'm trying to remember what it's called, that we looked into it for a while for us and it didn't quite work. But, with all this, I was gonna bring up some of this AI conversation, but we're gonna save that for another time. But video editing, creation of some of these things, like, it's kind of insane what we can do now. Where we're going in the future, and when I say future, I don't mean years, I mean like this year. By the end of this year, the shit we're going to be able to do is mind-boggling. It will completely disrupt and close down certain skill sets, which is not necessarily a negative thing. We'll come back to that conversation in the future. But with video, there was a program that we tried before where you could pre-film the video, and then there was a like this, you started with yourself holding like a whiteboard, and you were like, hey, name, wanted to send you this video. But then there was an automation that you could change that name. And with Descript, which we do use, for example, there's voice dubbing, which would take the manual step of writing it in. But like, you could literally make one video one time and have a really quick edit so that the video is actually customized to each individual person that goes out. Like, that stuff is possible now as well. And even if people know like, oh, this is some fancy editing shit, it's still like you've gone through the effort to send a message that's hyper personalized to me in a video form or whatever. So I still feel like it lands heavy there. Jennifer, let's kick it to you, because you were saying, and I mentioned as well, like direct to membership has been a conversation that's propped up again in the Yogapreneur Collective network here, but retention is on everyone's mind in general. What are you seeing with your clients, and what are the conversations you're having around? Because this is an extension of what Carol's talking about, like having follow-up and good customer service, but even beyond that, like the bigger retention strategy, intro to membership to lifetime.
Yeah, a lot of people came out hard with really, really discounted free weekends that, first you're coming for 3 free classes, and then you're coming to a heavily discounted first month of membership or intro offer, same thing. Then like, can you see the value from going to 3 free classes to 3 weeks of classes for $29 to paying $139? Like that is the more of that. Like, we're all very excited that we have all of these new people and all of these, new members, but how long can we retain people and help them see the value of free $2 a class, and then they're paying, $139 out of their checking account the next month.
Yeah.
So I think
that's
people are in that like honeymoon phase of having all the things, but it's a little bit of a panic. Like, I have all this, now how do I keep it? And what are the industry averages so that I don't beat myself up and think that, I'm not doing it right if I am doing all the things. I mean,
Teresa, I want to spin this.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, said, Teresa, I want to spin this to you, but for industry averages, let's maybe, Jennifer, talk some of those numbers. So what are you like when you're working with clients? What are some of the numbers that you would recommend to be as like a good peg point, a baseline?
Well, I mean, if we're looking at overall churn after, 3 months or something like that, I like to keep it below 10% for membership. But I don't know how that is affected when you start with a big bucket of people that you've sold stuff to really cheap.
I can comment on that a little bit. So Mara and I did this in a few cases, and we really were diligent about tracking this because we really wanted to get the numbers. So one of the campaigns that we ran in 3 different instances was like giving away a free week pass, not a free class, a free week pass, because the single class free thing had been like kind of done in a lot of markets. And what we found was it seemed at first like the upfront sort of benefit of it seemed not awesome because you had a ton of people claiming it. It was only half of the people that ever even come in to use it. That was the big surprise to me. It's like we could get 500 people to claim it in a city and only 250 would ever even show up at all. So there's like, when you're doing something like that, you have to actually keep selling. Like, the fact that I've claimed a free week does not mean I'm coming to do yoga. You have to keep selling me to come in and get to the class. Of those people, the retention rate from that thing to whatever the first deal was, the intro, was definitely lower than standard. It was about 50% again. So like, we're trying to sell an intro at 70%. It was more down like 50, 60%, depending on the studio. So let's call it 50. And then of those people who make it through that, the retention rate was lower than average again. So if the standard would be 25, 30%, it was more like 20%. But if we looked at total people who end up on membership after 3 months and total revenue, when you follow the whole thing through, it outperformed doing generic advertising and selling into a higher priced intro and having the higher conversion rate, because the total volume at the top of the funnel was so much larger. So that was sort of the epiphany, was like, that was the key, is if you're going to run a model like an even open house, right? Having an open house where it's only irregular members and like you get 30 new people coming in and then you're selling it really cheap, probably it's still not a bad thing to do, but it probably ends up being a wash by the end. Having an open house where you have 3 classes a day for 2 days and you get 200 new people through the doors, absolutely worth it. Because even if you have a lower conversion, like the total volume up top was higher. So it becomes a volume game, was my experience with that stuff. Here's a thought though, that I would, because I get what you're alluding to, and I agree that it's an element, but I find it interesting how many studios we encounter that have like inclusivity, for example, and some of their core values and all these other things. And they're worried about raising prices. They don't want to make it expensive and et cetera, et cetera. And then, but at the same time, they're reluctant to like, I don't want to give it away for free. I don't want to cheapen my product. So there's like this weird juxtaposed sentiment around the whole thing. But I know I said I was going to spin it to you, Teresa, but actually this leans into what Alex was talking about before. My thought is always, if your product is actually so good and actually solves problems and actually makes people feel amazing, whether I show up on a free class or a paid or an intro or whatever else, in theory, it should be compelling enough for me to want to come back and do it more. Like, the idea is lower price so that I experience the value, so that I'm like, I don't care what the cost is, like the cost becomes irrelevant. So the counter thought to what, Jennifer, what you're bringing up is like, if I'm not willing to jump from $29 to 130, is that a price issue? Or like, we attracted the wrong client? Like, is that really the issue? Or is it a product, service, problem solving, value issue?
Yeah, I mean, personally, in a perfect world, I wish we could get away from this, like this feeling in the fitness industry that we have to discount our things in order to get people in. You know, I go get a manicure somewhere, they're not giving me a discount for the first time. Like, I got a pedicure the other day with my mom, and I swear the lady got out all the tools. I don't think they ever touched my toes. She just kind of like moved around my toes, but I should have gotten half price on that one, right? Like, you know, I just think it's an interesting philosophy that we think we need to make things a discount. Like, our rent's not discounted. Our teachers don't get paid half price when cheap people come in. Like, it's, you know, it's a shame that we've set up this. We're one of the only industries that does this.
That's an interesting thought. I don't disagree. I would say originally intros, Alex, you'll remember this. I think you and I talked about this before. Intros were not a thing in the beginning. They didn't exist, but neither did monthly auto pay. Like, the first intro ever that was relatively prevalent was second class free. You paid for your first class and you would get your second class, and then you had to choose what you were doing. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. There are a couple of studios, one in particular that I know of, that she has deleted their intro. There's no intro. And the drop-in's like $35 or $40. And then membership's like $150. And like, that's it. And the only other thing they did is they put a 5-class pass in place, which they didn't have before, so that they had one lower barrier to entry pass. And they're crushing it. So I think it's definitely possible. You know, one of the extended thoughts on what you just said that comes to mind for me is this idea that people buy your pricing. Like, whether your intro is $1 or $50, and the fact that like, we would all be like, that's a great deal. Usually it's $200 a month. Now it's only $50. What a great savings. If I haven't been there, like, I don't have any context for why that's a good deal. So like, I don't give a shit. Like, I'm not going to go to you because you have a $30 intro. That's not really the purpose that it serves from an attraction standpoint. So go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah. And I think that I had 2 things on this vein of thought. One is that, to your point, the product is important, whether you pay $2 for your first class or 20, the product that they're getting is super important. And so that should be enough ideally to keep them, like you said. But then also you've got your sales process in there. And so whatever you're doing in the studio, through email, through texting, that whole first month should be really strong and really making them feel special and providing value that way too, and creating a relationship with them so that they're falling in love with you. And again, that should be the same, whether they're coming in for a really low price or a higher price, right? And then the other piece that goes to discounting too is that, you know, we in this industry, like Jennifer said, tend to discount like this. And we forget sometimes that people associate value of a service or product based on how much it costs. Like that's like part of your first impression about that service or product is how much it costs, you know? And so, you know, like Prada and like super expensive fashion industry products, you know, a lot of it is we're saying it's going to cost this much and people instantly think that it's like super fabulous, right? And so there's that aspect to it that we forget about a lot. And so if you're going to try and attract people with basement bargain prices, or however you say it, they're associating a value with you right off the bat there. So I think it's important not to forget that. Pricing.
One of the things I agree, and actually there's some interesting science on this. There was even a couple of studies duplicated, and I think we've talked about it before, where they gave people 3 bottles of wine in a paper bag, and they said, this is a cheap one, this is a mid-range, and this is the expensive one. They drank the wine, and then they asked them to rate their experience of drinking the wine. And all of them said the expensive one was better. They're like, it's smoother, it tastes better, the tannins, blah, 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 blah. And then after the fact, they were revealed they were all the exact same bottle of wine. There was no difference in what they drank, but their experience of the wine, they said was different. And so it's this thought that, like, in a weird way, charging more for your product makes your product better. Actually, it makes the experience of your product better because you're willing to pay more for it, or because you did pay more for it. And on the other hand, too, it's the other way around. If I charge you $50 a month, but then I have to put a lot of effort into offering you great service in a yoga studio, there's this unfortunate behind the scenes reluctance around, like, man, Alex is only paying $50 a month. He's paying like $3 a class, and he's freaking complaining about this thing. Like, take a hike, Alex, as when we're on those burnt out days, you know, as a studio owner. But if I'm charging Alex $250 a month, I kind of rise to the occasion a little bit better. Like, it also changes it for me because I know that, like, there's a better exchange taking place. So I think that's a really good point.
You know, I would say,
Alex, what about?
Yeah, I was
go
going to
ahead.
just say a couple things. You know, just to back into it all, like, it's that cohesive, authentic experience, right? That differentiates you from other studio. And one of the things I would say is that, you know, depending on your demographic, the country and the world, and the demographic knowledge of yoga studios as a whole, and their opportunities to go to other studios, really does affect how you approach your community. So you really have to meet your community where they're at, and not just, you know, essentially, if you're an expert teacher, let's say, or studio owner, and you go into a demographic that's never had any yoga, you know, if you're all the way up here in your teachings and your pricing and your classes, and they're brand new to it, there's going to be a big discrepancy. So my thought is, depending on your pricing, like, you know, you can go really cheap on an intro in an area that's never done any yoga and doesn't have as much opportunity. But as you get more discernment in your demographic, people are going to start to say, geez, the more expensive bottle of wine is the better, more authentic place to practice. And to Carol's experience with these 3 studios, you know, I would say, first impression is absolutely everything. And you must have number one staff, trained teachers, and you must, as an owner, lead the way. So you need to be there with eye contact and make every effort to meet that new student where they're at and make them feel comfortable, because the afterwards, the text and the emails, all that stuff just supports, like Carol says, would bring her back to that experience, right? And just supports, and she may have gone to 3 more other studios, and if she didn't have that first impression, all the text and everything becomes noise, right? But the difference is the teacher, the impact, the name, the all the above, and that is what today's world, when you're really busy and there's a lot of other studios to go to and other classes to go to, that's what has the impact. That's what we remember, that human connection. So I think that's can't be emphasized enough, right? We talked about AI, we talked about these other things coming forward. Those things are important. The other aspect of this is that the model of yoga studios is essentially, for success when you sign a $5,000 lease, is higher volume, low touch. So you open the funnel, you get a lot of people in there, and you hope you retain 30 or 35, 40% of them. There may be room in the future where there's no intro. The studio runs really well with 15 students in class. The teachers are paid well. The lease is X, and it's a different model, but it's still profitable because it's not ultimately how much you make, it's how much you save. And I think that,
well said.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important thing. A lot of people, I teach at a studio, I really want to go open a studio. I'm going to put it in the number one spot on Pearl Street or whatever. I'm going to pay $6,500 a month, no big deal. I'm going to pack it full of 45, 50 students. Awesome. 55 classes a week. I'm going to pay my teachers $50. And all of a sudden they're making 8% profit a year or something like that, right? There is possible room out there to have a different model. We've seen it online classes, and we've seen it potentially like higher touch, lower volume. And I'm just, shaking it up because look at Pilates, look at reformer classes, etc.
Look at Legree. Yeah.
Yep. Legree. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Legree in LA, like $350 a month for the one premier studio that Buddy's at. Sold out every single class.
Yeah. And also let me throw this last thing in, is that we talked about briefly, but this time of year, if you've paid a lot of money in marketing, you've revamped your website, you have X amount of styles of classes in your studio, and you have descriptions, and you have existing students selling your specific type of classes to their friends to come to class. If those students are not experiencing what you're advertising, what you're telling them they're going to experience in those classes, I said it earlier, but this is like the 80-20 rule. If I'm on the couch and I'm going to a flow class or I'm going to a yin class, and I get there and the class is 80% of what I expected, what I desired, and 20% of like, oh, wow, aha moment, what an amazing teacher. She really expanded my understanding of this practice. That's a hook. But if she goes into the class and it's 20% of what you expected from home and 80% of like, I don't know what that was, that's not a restorative class, I might go look at the other intro at the other studio.
Good point. I want to come back to that because I think we can spin this back to Carol's experience too. But I just wanted to add into your comment. I agree with what you're talking about with the yoga model, and Jennifer's identifying as well that like the yoga business model, it's not bad, but what I've struggled with in coaching for years and in my own studios building before and managing is there's this weird middle zone, I think, that yoga studios are in, because yes, we're higher volume. I agree from a class-based standpoint, Alex, you're 100% correct. But like real high volume is box gym. People sign in, they do whatever the fuck they want. You can charge them $30 a month, but you're going to oversell your capacity by 5,000%, because most gyms that are actually making money, they function on the model that if everyone actually showed up at the same time, they would break fire code. Like they wouldn't be able to service them. So They're banking on people not using the product. Yoga falls into banking on people showing up to class and using the product. So we don't fall into that category, but we're not the reformer Pilates where every single person takes up 240 square feet of space in the studio. So there's only 8 spots in a room, or Orange Theory with the equipment or whatever else. So like the supply and demand dynamic is changed. So studios have struggled, and we're at a moment where it's really like being questioned again, where we're in this weird middle zone where you do kind of need the 40 people per class for a hyper profitable business because we have enough space for it. But at the same time, we can't put the price as high as the super controlled situation, but we can't put it as low as the open gym. And as a side note, we had a studio that I worked with for almost a year. And unfortunately, they're one of the cases that like my heart still goes out to them. We worked for a whole year and I charged them full price on everything, but they just were not interested in taking our recommendations straight up. They did not implement the stuff we were working on. It came to like, we shared a different vision about what the business would needed to be for success. So we parted paths, and that's okay. But they were the model. We've had a couple studios come in like this, but this one in particular, they were the model where they did the like, I want as much recurring revenue as possible. So their monthly membership was like $40 for the monthly membership. Smaller market that they were in, they had 580 people on the autopay, and they were barely breaking even in their expenses. So it was interesting because we got to actually see like, cool, you attracted everyone. They all have this membership. They're all sticking on it. But like, you need 1,000 people paying you that much for you to start to actually make any real money personally. Your margin's too tight. Like that model doesn't work in a yoga studio. It doesn't work on paper in my mind. And that plus another one were direct experiences where I'm like, it doesn't work. It doesn't, because I've had that thought like, cool, we need high volume. Just drop your price really low, get everybody. Whoop, I'm getting fired up and hitting my microphone now. Anyways, I digress. What I wanted to spin this back to Carol, here would be the question for Carol for what Alex, you were just saying about that experience, first impressions, but then the expectation that's set versus the experience that happens. Carol, when you went to these studios, did you have an expectation for the class that you were walking into? Like, did you know ahead of time, this is the class, the type of class that I'm going into, or were you going in totally blind? And what was your experience versus that expectation?
It's actually funny you bring this up because the one where there was nobody at the front desk and I had to introduce myself to the instructor, it was online. It said it was a level 2 vinyasa heated. And the instructor, super sweet. It was actually a good class. I don't want to, get to
no shade. Our coaches' jobs,
exactly. Right?
Our coaches' jobs is to tell the truth. We got to tell like we see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the instructor, she was a sub, and she said to the class, is this room usually heated for this one? And there's like a lot of shrugs from the regulars. And this one lady said, she said, I wouldn't care if it wasn't heated today. And I was sitting there thinking, please, I came for heat. And, and I didn't sweat one drop in the class, which is very odd for me. So I was disappointed. And just like Alex said, like when I was sitting at home looking at my phone, I was expecting something and it was not that at all. And, when I was telling my mom and friends about it later, I was like, it was sort of disappointing, right? And I think if I lived there and that looked, and was going to go back, they'd probably get one more chance with me. Like, if I'm expecting something and I get something else and you do that more than once, I'm not, I don't trust you anymore. I don't have that. I need trust. So it was definitely to what Alex was talking about, and it did not fulfill my expectations. So make sure you're consistent and, doing what you're going to.
I think that speaks volumes to when you think of counter argument would be like, imagine if you were going to an Orange Theory class or an F45 class and you got to an F45 class and it was, ballroom dancing or something, it was completely different, right? It's somewhat acceptable in the yoga world. Like, oh, I went to so-and-so's class or I went to the studio in Seattle and it was really wonderful, or, we kind of like the variety, but yet we want consistency. So I keep going back to the 80-20 rule. It worked very well as far as like teaching teachers to be really consistent, on point, on brand to the class that you as the owner have put on the schedule, right? And hiring to that you're hiring to a job description, essentially, right? This teacher is capable of doing X, Y, and Z. And they are on the schedule for these 3 classes that support the brand, that support the vision, that support the goals. And consistency is critical. And when you don't have that, maybe you have some teachers that are struggling to fit to those classes, or our job is to help them to do so. And then if they can't, move on and get a new teacher, because it affects you. The ripple effect is this: if they have a disappointing experience and they tell like 5 different people, right? You're visiting a friend in Ohio or wherever you were taking these classes, then you go home to your 3 friends that live in that area. Then you're back at home and you've told them they're never going to go to the studio because, oh, my friend is a teacher and she owned a studio. She didn't have a good experience there. So I don't know. Those are things that come to mind.
Dude, that's such a good point. Go ahead, Teresa.
I was just going to say really quick, and Carol's generous because she'll give you 2 tries, but a lot of people will only give you one chance.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it's so
And
true.
we all know that like, negative stuff sticks longer and faster and easier, and people are more apt to share negative experiences than they are positive experiences. So there's that double whammy side of negative experience.
I would say too is like, okay, this is maybe the elephant, right? Like, as a studio owner, maybe you're aware of the fact that the 12 teachers on your schedule, maybe, let's say 60% presently right now are not quite teaching the classes in the way you envision. But you keep going. You work on the texting, you work on the emails, you work on the pricing, work on the marketing. But, what we should talk about maybe is like creating a solve for that and helping owners like look at it in a truthful way and call it out and look for ways to improve and or hire to what you want.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on like practical application, right? I'd like to hear what you guys have for that too. Just to double down on this, prior to us being in the current iteration of the Yogapreneur Collective, I used to have a small Facebook group. This was maybe like 8 years ago. Carol even was in it at one point. And I remember telling the story of like when we first moved full-time to Sayulita here, I went to every studio and took every class, and like way out in the jungle did classes and like all sorts of shit. And it was pretty janky spa yoga stuff for the most part because it was like vacation-y things, but there's a couple actual studios here. One of them, like, yeah, people contact us. They're like, hey, Josh, we're coming to Sayulita. Like, I want to do yoga classes. Where do we go? I'm thinking about going to, it's called Paraíso Yoga. And I will talk shit on it because I don't like the owner either. She's a very mean person to like my kids and stuff. But that aside, because that's tainted it completely. I gave them I bought like a 5-pack there and gave them the 5 classes. And every single time my experience was nothing like the expectation and wasn't good either. It didn't like, oh, it was not what I expected, but I love it. It was nothing. So now to our point, like people ask, I haven't been there in a few years. It's possible that it's really good now, but I'll still talk shit about it and be like, nah, like don't go to that place. Go to the Rose Room. Because I know for sure the teacher's there, you're going to get what it says on the schedule, and they're probably going to still start 8 minutes late, and you're still going to have some randomness in there because spa yoga, we're at the beach, but it's pretty good. And like, they're all really nice, whatever. So I end up promoting one versus the other, but the promotion of the Rose Room is irrelevant. It's the fact that I would talk down on the other one. If I was like, I'm indifferent, but this is my favorite, that's a different conversation than don't go there. It sucks. That's how you sync a business. I've got my thoughts, but practical application, Alex, what you're bringing up, the word I would use is productize. How do you productize your classes in a way that there's a guarantee of consistency But also there's that balance, like you're saying, 80-20, where we're not taking away from the personality of the class, the flavor, the tone, the dynamicness of the teacher. Teresa, maybe you could pipe in with your studio. Did you have something in place for like sort of productization and control over the consistency of delivery?
I worked a lot with my instructors. So I took all of their classes, and I would do that on a really regular basis so that I would really always have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in their classes. That was super important to me. And so my method of handling this was just taking their classes regularly and then giving them feedback on little things that they could tweak. And they all grew over time with that method. So I was lucky enough to have instructors that would work with me and take my feedback. And so I never really had to just say, see ya to any of them. None of them were such poor instructors or with poor attitudes or anything that I had to do that. Sometimes that you have to do that. But that worked really well for me. And some owners will say, I don't want to do that. I don't have time to do that, but you're never going to know what's going on in their classes unless you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So continuing education and like feedback and that being like a culture that you've built in. I really like that. I totally agree. To your last comment, I don't know. It's like sometimes with owners from the outside in, we've got to push back a little bit. Like, I don't have time to do that. Seriously, you don't have time not to do that. This, like, your teachers and your classes are your product. So this whole conversation just leads to that concept. Like, if your product is shit, you can go get any other email, marketing, advertising, ad, website stuff up and going, and you will diminish the output that you get from your studio if your product just doesn't back it all up. So it is sort of a necessity.
Yeah, I would also suggest too, because sometimes as an owner, like let's say you have 5 different styles of classes on your schedule or what have you, or more. You may really not be a champion restorative, teacher or yin teacher, but you can hire a lead teacher that can handle that brand, in which the rest of your newer teachers can learn to emulate, and then relieve you of the pressure of being the most authority on yin classes. And I think that's a really critical part, because if you're trying to teach a teacher something that it's important to your brand, but you're not really authentic and really grounded in that teaching, then it's a good opportunity to like relinquish that responsibility and find somebody to help you, because ultimately you're leading the business in a direction. And I think that can feel, enlightening or lighten the load for you as a studio owner, for sure.
Great point. Still, yeah, you don't have time not to do it, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it either. This is the building the business part. Like, this concept is not different than any other concept in your business, which is, if you approach entrepreneurship in a specific way and you're really like building a yoga business as a yogapreneur in the ways that we talk about in coaching and stuff, you're building yourself out of a job. Like, at some point in theory, you get to this place where like you don't do anything anymore. The last thing you do is like let someone else be the CEO of the company, and you hire for that. Now, that might not be your goal, but it's like that path is what creates the expansive capacity of the business, the better margin for the business, the de-stressing of the business, the buying back of your time. So even on mentorship of your teachers, to Alex's point, that too doesn't have to fall on your shoulders. I've got a thought on how to get towards that, but I wanted to let Jennifer pipe in. What do you do with your team? Because Jennifer, I've always been really inspired by how you manage your team, your open communication systems with them, your like really diligent push on sticking to core values. When you talk about it from like a product standpoint, the class says it's this, the teacher's going to deliver it. How do you make sure that those things actually happen as they're kind of?
It's a great question, because it's a fine line. Like, when you're not teaching a Bikram set sequence, or you're not core power, where your teachers are handed a sequence and they have to teach it, one of the things that we pride my studio on is the teachers create their own sequence every single time. And they're created with intention, for a reason. Each pose is in a specific place for a reason. They know why it's been done, and they've practiced it in their own body before they teach it. So you want to make sure that the teachers have autonomy, and I trust them to create classes that have integrity, and people are learning, and they're going to feel inspired by them, but not be too surprised by them. So it is a fine line depending upon the style of yoga that you have. That being said, I take every teacher's class at least once a month. So I'm also definitely in there, and I know what people are teaching. And, if there's any kind of issues, then I, have a conversation with those teachers. We also do continuing education. So not necessarily continuing education of, here's a new way to teach half pigeon or something like that. It's kind of like bigger picture, deeper things on different ways to connect with your students in different ways. So we offer a lot of continuing education as well as part of our teacher training program, and it's free for our teachers to take those classes too. So there's continuously leveling up, I think, of the group in general. But if you don't go in and take people's classes, you cannot give feedback. And if I have one studio that I'm working with now, and one of the jobs of her studio manager is going to be this. She's going to be the one that's going to be taking the classes, giving the feedback. And she takes 2 classes. I think they have 15 or 20 teachers, and the studio manager takes 2 classes a week from 2 different teachers. And then the next week she takes that teacher out for like a half-hour coffee, and they kind of go over things and talk about things. So she's kind of hitting once a quarter, at least, all of the teachers. So it all also goes back to like the onboarding when you're bringing your teachers in. You can't hire them and then all of a sudden take their class and then say, oh my gosh, you only did a 3-minute Shavasana, or, this is an all levels class and you spoke only in Sanskrit. Like everything goes back to like how those expectations are set. Right. And it's hard because a lot of people, including myself, when I opened my studio almost 10 years ago, I didn't necessarily have that. And I wasn't comfortable in having that like leadership role. I was hiring these teachers who had been teaching like forever, and I wanted to, honor that. So I have been working with my clients on like a re-onboarding, like grand opening for the teachers and the staff, instead of like a grand reopening for post-COVID times. It's more like, okay, like I'm working really hard on consistency of the product, and I'm really excited about these new things. We're going to bring everybody back on as though they're being hired for the first time. And it's going to be really exciting. And like you mentioned with core values, every single thing that I ever offer to any of my staff or my teachers, I say, we're doing this, and this is the why. And it goes back to a core value. Every single time. It's not, oh, we're raising prices because I want to get a new boat. In their mind, that's what they think. Like Jennifer's raising prices because she wants something, right? So
that's a valid reason though, isn't it?
And that's fine.
A new boat.
And I would love a new boat. But like, and that's fine. And that could be a reason, but as long as that fits within our core values. So I always really try to always have the why of the feedback.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important detail, because if people aren't bought in on why you're doing something, my experience has been in sales training, like our first sales training that we do with teams, it's 4 hours long. The first hour to 90 minutes of it are just talking about why any of the conversation that we're about to have matters. Like if you're not bought in on why we're doing this in the bigger vision, then the how is irrelevant. The how is usually not complicated. It's buying in on the why, so you actually implement. So if I'm taking a couple of the things that you guys are saying, one of the things that we recommend with studios as well is, if the style of class, if we're talking about Mysore style Ashtanga, that you're really sticking to the lineage of it, or a little bit of Baptiste or a Moto yoga or a Bikram yoga, where like there's a formula, that's one thing. But for everyone else, you have to create your own formula. How much detail you put in the formula is entirely up to you. And so what I would suggest is you might look at it like, if we say power flow, this is what we mean. A power flow has these components and this feeling to the class, and it's sort of like internal. So it could be as vague as you can do whatever you want in a power flow, invent the whole thing, but it has to check these 3 boxes. Or it could be as detailed as you're always going to start with breathing, then 5 vinyasas, then standing postures leading to a peak posture, leading to back bends, to floor stretching, to some sort of meditation with the breathing with the savasana. Whatever you put in there, I don't care, but that's the formula for the class. So you can like decide how far you go with that. But to your point, Jennifer, on expectations, like if that doesn't exist, then how do you give someone feedback on their class being what it should or shouldn't be? Go ahead.
Real quick, one thing we didn't talk about was, and there's a great resource in the YC about writing the class descriptions. So when Carol was choosing her class online and she was reading the description, if the description isn't correct, then, and detailed enough, then also that's the beginning of the expectations, right? Like if it says, and people have, I feel like now, it used to be you were on your computer, so you had like a big description of the class. So you felt like you had space. Now I feel like with phones, people are making shorter descriptions because they feel like people just don't want to see that much stuff. And there's a great resource on the YC about what goes into a good class description, as well as a teacher bio. And I love them.
Yeah, go find those. They're in the courses section. If you can't find them, someone post about it. We'll post a link to them. But getting your description right and checking a few boxes, is another part of that formula. But to your point, if you have a really well written class description, yes, that's external, but it's also internal. You also give that to your teacher and be like, this is the class that you're on the schedule to teach. So like, if someone takes this class, to Alex's point, they should afterwards be like, yeah, that's what happened. If they're like, there was nothing like that, that's where there's an issue potentially. Go ahead, Teresa.
I just wanted to throw in too, when we're talking about product and evaluating how the instructors are teaching, and we talked about the owner or a manager taking the classes and observing, but it's also super important to utilize your current members for feedback too. Mm. Every business has a few members that know what they're talking about, that know about yoga. They've been practicing for years. Maybe they're an instructor or a past instructor or something like that. And tapping into those clients is super important. And this is a piece that sometimes people forget. And for the past, I don't know how many years, whenever I end up talking to a studio owner or start working with a studio owner that's like killing it with big, huge businesses, they all do this. This is something that I will always see across the board. They all talk to their clients on a regular basis to find out client perspectives of things. And so, especially if they're a longtime client, you choose them carefully. And especially if they're a longtime client, they can really provide valuable insight from the client's point of view. They hear what people are saying around them in the room and things like that. And I even have been to studios where I've been that person. So especially when there's a new client, I'll get like a text, hey, you were in class yesterday with one of our new teachers. Can you give us some feedback? And then I know what I'm talking about. And so I'll give them some really valuable feedback. So there's almost always people like that in your client base. So tap into those people too.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's Alex, we'll let you jump in on that. I think that client feedback is, I was just going to say, the only thing I would add to that is client feedback, in my opinion, is best addressed as a little bit more direct conversation, like rather than like put a poll out and let people pick things, because you need to be able to ask the follow-up question. If they're like, well, I like this or don't like that, you need to be like, tell me more about that. You need to, that depth if you really want. Yeah, totally. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and I would say to Teresa's point, like, longtime students often have bought into your product, obviously, and into your brand and your intent. So if you have a variety of classes on your schedule, one thing that's really sometimes challenging for teachers is to create distinguished differences between classes. So if you have a slow flow and a vinyasa and you have all these other things, all of a sudden, Susan takes the class on Tuesday from the teacher, then she takes a different class on Friday from the same teacher, but yet the classes were sort of the same, but yet it was told to me via the schedule they're going to be different. So one of the things a longtime student can explain to an owner is sort of, you want to have those distinguishing aspects if you're going to have different styles of classes on your schedule, so that it is distinct, separate or distinguished experience. And that's something that's where the lines get blurred, right? If you're getting a mat class, Pilates class, or reformer class, they're just totally different, right? So it's like nurturing that experience and really enhancing that and teaching your teachers like what distinguishes this versus that class. You may have some of the same postures, I don't care, in each class, but the actual experience that they take away from that 60, 90-minute practice, whatever, is separate or is different.
Yeah. I would add to that too, Alex, that, or the if that's like hard for you to do. So here's how this appears, and you can go audit your own studio right now. Like if you go online and it says Vinyasa flow, power flow, Ashtanga, flow level 2, like as a what's the difference between these classes? So if I read the description, I'm like, they're kind of all the same thing. They either need to be so poignantly different experience, or for a few studios, what we said, like, why do we have this? And we're like, well, the teachers all wanted to name their own class. That's why we have like slow flow, sunrise flow, yin yang flow. And I'm like, well, is the yin yang flow and the sunrise flow, and they're like, are they totally different things? Or like, well, it's that teacher. Then I'm like, these are just all called flow class. Like we're just renaming all of them flow, and then we're saying in a flow we're going to have the flow elements, and then it's teacher's choice after that. That would actually be clearer and way simplified from a communication standpoint too. So that's the other way to maybe approach it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just like pricing, right? You just, gone are the days of like, every known style of yoga on your menu. That was so 90s or whatever it was. And now simplify, streamline. And then, I mean, my experience, it was just a great opportunity. Like we just have a flow class, right? And then I can go find the best flow teachers in my community, period. Right. And versus Iyengar this and that and the other, and try to plug and chug your teachers,
I agree. If you confuse, you lose is what's coming to mind for me as you're saying that too. Too much pricing, people get confused, they don't do anything. Too many classes, they don't know which one to pick, they don't book a class at all. Or they're like reluctant to try another class. It's the idea of like, you go to the restaurant, there's 80 things on the menu, but you order the same thing 80% of the time because the guarantee around what it is. So that's actually the analogy that we were using with a client recently too. I was talking about restaurants in town here. The reason that we go to one restaurant is to get the pizza there. It has 20 other things and not pizza, but we go there to get the pizza. We go to this other restaurant to get a hamburger and fries because it's the best hamburger and fries. They also sell chicken wings and salad and stuff. I'll never buy that stuff there. Is it good? I don't know, but I don't even try it because I go to the restaurant to get the burger. You go to the Thai place to get the Thai food. You know what I'm saying? Like yoga studios are a little bit like that. You have to be aware of that potential, that if you just have all the stuff, but you're not known for the thing, And there's confusion around like, well, I don't know, what are they kind of specialized in? What are they known for? They have 18 different flow classes and also these 3 hatha classes and also this like slow class and yin. Like, it's confusing and I can't define you in my mind for why I go there. So when that happens, how that plays out in a studio is then I start following the teacher. I don't care about your business in the studio. I just like Jennifer's class. And I'll even talk like that. Where do you go? Well, I go to Nomad Yoga Studio to go to Jennifer's class. Do you think I should go to Nomad Yoga Studio? I don't know. Come to Jennifer's class with me. And now your teacher is a priority over the studio. Yeah. Oh, we could keep going on this forever, but we're out of time. You guys have a great weekend. Comment down below. What are you doing? You know, we retention, intro, and your product. What are you doing with it after this conversation? Are you like, oh shit, there's some adjustments, or I think maybe I'm missing it here? Post it down below in the comments. We'll make some follow-up videos on it. I want to hear about it. And if you guys have not booked your free coaching call yet, if you're the end of January and you're like, I'm overwhelmed, there's all this stuff going on in this conversation, I'm like, I don't know what to do, book a free coaching call. Just go to any of the profiles of the coaches here, Alex or Carol or Teresa or Jennifer. Free coaching call link is right there. It's free. It's just to get you some actionable stuff to go and sink your teeth into, put into your business right away. Let them help out. Other than that, Kay's not here, so go do some yoga,